and welcome to another Parallax Press Mindful Resistance webcast, our third session entitled How to Resist Without Burning Out. My name is Stephen D. Lowe. I'm the Media and Operations Director here at Parallax Press. Parallax is a nonprofit publisher founded by the Buddhist Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. We're the leading publisher of books on mindfulness in daily life. Further ado, I want to introduce our two teachers today, Kaira Lingo and Mushim Patricia Ikeda. Kaira teaches Buddhist meditation with a focus on activists, people of color, artists, educators, and families. She edited Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Planting Seeds, Practicing Mindfulness with Children, an ordained nun of 15 years in Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing. She is now a lay Dharma teacher based in Washington, D.C. Mushim Patricia Ikeda is a Buddhist teacher, social justice activist, mother, writer, and diversity and inclusion consultant. Her year-long program, Practice in Transformative Action, received the Gil Lopez Peacemaker Award from the Association for Dispute Resolution. She was also awarded an honorary Doctor of Sacred Theology degree from or by the Star King School for Ministry. Kaira and Mushim, thank you so much for offering your presence with us this morning, and welcome. We'll start off with Mushim with an opening meditation.
To find a place where you feel relatively comfortable. Try to make the environment as comfortably quiet as possible by turning off phones. And the attention is going inward, so we don't have to become stiff or solemn or formal. We're simply beginning to gently direct the attention inward. We can close the eyes or keep them open gently. We might want to begin by taking a few deeper breaths and allowing a little bit of stress or more to be released on the out breath. So as we breathe in, we're aware we're breathing in life-giving oxygen. And as we're breathing out, releasing a little bit of stress. Let's forget about what we've done before this and what our plans are for afterwards. We're here in community now all over the world. How fantastic is that? We're with our Dharma friends, our spiritual friends. So we're breathing in and out, and then we allow the breath to be natural. You don't have to stiffen the body, just settle in. As my yoga teacher says, you can do micro adjustments, wiggle a little bit. He likes to say he likes to wiggle the body to become more in alignment and then settle into your stationary meditation position. In the teachings of the Buddha, intention is very important. I invite you to set an intention for mindfulness meditation. Along with our theme here today, would you like to set an intention to be as joyful, as fresh, as well-resourced and well-rested, to be as abundant in well-being as you possibly can be, so that you can offer all of this to your community in mindful resistance. So if you'd like, set an intention and relax. allowing the breath to be natural, maybe short, medium, or long. So we're just breathing naturally. And there's an invitation to gently and with kindness and compassion to the self, mindfully observe. Mindfully observe means try to observe without judging. We're just looking, just noticing any physical sensations in the body, such as warmth or coolness, tingling or numbness, expansion or contraction. See how curious you can become about your own experience. What do you notice? And if you have a chronic pain condition, you might like to try to direct your attention to other parts of the body where there are more pleasant sensations. So thank you for your meditation practice, for your mindfulness, and thank you for joining me in a few moments of mindfulness meditation in a stationary posture.
Thank you, Mushim. And now we'll move on to the somatic practices. And I think, Mushim, you were going to start us off with that.
Sure, I can do that. Let's see. So just a few moments of body practices. So our practice, and both Kaira, Jewel, and I will be talking about our theme of mindful resistance and how not to burn out. Pretty hard to think our way towards not burning out. The ability to not burn out comes from being in the body, working with the body, refreshing the body, inviting in joy, inviting in relaxation. A practice that you can do almost any time and anywhere if mindfulness of the breath is available to you, and it isn't to everyone. So feel free, if this doesn't work for you, you might simply want to do the physical movements and not concentrate on the breath. If you can work with the breath, that can work as well. So this is just a very simple technique called relaxing breath. And the objective is to try to extend the out breath, to make the exhalation a little longer or perhaps even twice as long as the in-breath. So we'll begin simply by taking a few deep breaths, and I'm going to use my arms and hands to kind of be able to increase awareness of the breath. So on the in-breath, I invite you, if you like, to the palms face upward, breathing in. Big breath out. Breathing in, filling up the body, and out. You can make a sound as you breathe out, like ah. Breathing in, breathing out, ah. Relax. And now, if it's accessible to you, we're going to breathe in while opening the arms out and stretching them back. Again, if it works for you, at the farthest point of the stretch, you might want to look up a little bit of a back bend. If that doesn't work for you and you have had our neck and spine issues, don't do that. And as we breathe out, we're going to bring the arms forward and put the palms together. First, we'll try by breathing in to the count of 2 and breathing out to the count of 4. Follow along. If this doesn't meet your needs, you can adapt it in any way you like. So in 2, out, 2, 3, 4. In 2, out, 2, 3, 4. Let's try extending that, if it works for you, to in 3, counting to 3 on the inhalation, and relaxing out to 6 on the exhalation. In 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can stay with in 2, out 4, in 3, out 6, for those of you who've perhaps worked a little more with the breath. If available and accessible to you, let's try 4 and 8. In 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In 2, 3, 4, out. In 2, 3, 4, and you might curl in a little bit, out. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. And 3 more relaxing breaths, breathing in and out, and in. Everybody say ah on the out breath if you'd like on this last breath. Breathing in, out, ah. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mushim. I feel much better already. So I'll continue a few more somatic practices that can help with reducing stress and preventing burnout. And one is to just shake our body. So again, as Mushim said, feel free to adapt whatever I'm suggesting to work for your own body, and it might mean just leaving it out. But you could start with just shaking out a hand. Shake out your hand, and then shake out your whole arm. So let's shake around, and then shake out your other hand, and then shake out your other arm. And then if it's easy to shake out a leg, I can't show you that here, but shake out one leg and then shake out another leg. And you could shake your body as you sit. Just kind of shake arms and legs and torso and head, and then let your face shake and wiggle and move. And we'll open our face really big, so make a really big face. And now make a really small face. Let your face be soft and mushy and small. And then make a really big face. And a really small face. And we'll do it one more time, and this time you can add noises. You can make big noises when we do big face and small noises when we do a small face. Okay. Ah, and small noises. Good. Okay, so now I'll have you invite you to massage your face. So this is these exercises come from a interplay, which is an improvisational practice of accessing body wisdom. So get your temples and your scalp. We're going to move on from the face. You could massage your ears. And we're going to just check in with all of our skin. So you could do it as kind of a patting and just kind of saying hello to all of your skin. So feel your torso, get your back, your hips and your legs. You could just pat down to your feet. So let's say hello to your skin. Good. And take a deep breath as we were doing with Mushim already. And when you breathe out, you can sigh, you can make some noise as you exhale. So take a deep breath in. And we could do that one more time. Breathe in and sigh as you exhale. And then you could close your eyes for a moment if that is helpful for you, to just feel into how your body feels with this bit of attention, with this movement in the face, and how the skin feels, having shaken and then touched the skin. Just notice. And you could allow your face to smile. Allow a smile to come over your face. Smiling relaxes the more than 300 muscles in your face. Also, even if there's no external reason to smile, when you just smile, your brain releases helpful endorphins that create relaxation and well-being in the body. So you don't actually have to have an external reason to smile to set that chain of good conditions off in your body. Just let yourself smile. And as you exhale, let your body release. So thank you for trying that out. There is a book, and I don't remember the name of the author, but a book that says if human beings would shake their body like we did just now and breathe and sigh every day, there wouldn't be war. It's just those two practices would really help to release tension and strain. So I will go into teaching, and Mushim will follow. And so really just want to appreciate all of us for being on this call, and say that this is such an important area of exploration to really, how do we really take care of ourselves? Because these are very hard and troubling times. And there's great anxiety in many of us as individuals, in our communities, in our society, in our whole planet. And so this practice of self-care is really key to keeping ourselves grounded and nourished so that we can continue to be forces of transformation in our own lives and in the world. So one of the things I love that Thich Nhat Hanh shared, and we often call Thich Nhat Hanh Thai, means teacher in Vietnamese. He talked about the Buddha as our freshness, this capacity for awakening that each of us have inside of us. He defined that as our freshness, and I find that very helpful in speaking about self-care, that when we practice to take good care of ourselves, we maintain our freshness, we maintain our love of life, our sense of energy and vitality and motivation, even in the face of quite challenging, discouraging circumstances. So I think one of the things that really is helpful for nourishing our freshness, preventing burnout, is space to be creative and this sense of purpose, what we're really wanting for our lives. I read a very inspiring story by David Whyte, a poet, where he said that the opposite or the antidote to exhaustion, he was in a conversation with a monk, and this monk was telling him that the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest. It can be, but he was saying, in this case of David Whyte, it's really enthusiasm, that if we can find and stay committed to honoring what really deeply moves us in our own lives, that's what helps us not to burn out and to stay fresh, is to really have something we're committed to, that we're inspired by. Because I think for many of us who work in different activist circles or in different social change movements, there's a kind of can be a accepted norm for people who are working to change things, that we're always exhausted, and that's how it is when you're doing this kind of work. And there's this cynicism that comes into the work, and there's this sense of losing our freshness. And in a book called Trauma Stewardship, the author speaks about one of the symptoms of those who work with people who have trauma. One of the things that happens with people who work with trauma is secondary trauma, that after being exposed to so many just very heartbreaking stories or experiences of people we work with, and that we may have experienced ourselves, we may have firsthand trauma. But she says one of the symptoms of that is constantly being on, always being busy, always having to be engaged in something, and never really letting ourselves rest. And so this practice of coming back to take good care of ourselves and recognize how is our energy actually, because often we get into a kind of we just spiral where we lose our balance, we overdo, we get exhausted, and because we're so exhausted, we don't even know we're exhausted, and so we continue to exhaust ourselves. We can't stop. I've experienced that often, where if I stay up late on the computer, after a certain point, I have no good judgment anymore, and I may stay up really, really late, because I went through my threshold of where I could really take care of myself. So this knowing, how sometimes our own fatigue, our own loss of being in touch with our freshness pushes us to get even more fatigued, and we can really spiral to a place of real unhealth if we don't catch that pattern. So this constantly being on is can be balanced by taking time for stillness. So this self-care practice is really important, to make space and time for ourselves, to just be, to not have to always be doing, to not have to always be on. And it can be very challenging when we see all the urgent situations around us that need immediate response. To think that we always have to be responding, and we can't stop to take care of ourselves. But if we don't stop to take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to do much to help. So an example that I appreciate from Thai's life, when he was in Vietnam as a younger monk, he started the School of Youth for Social Service with thousands of young people that were being trained as social workers to help rebuild villages and to build schools and roads in the countrysides. Every week they took one day as a day of mindfulness. So there were bombs dropping, there were people very sick, there were such urgent situations, and yet every week they took one day to take care of themselves as self-preservation. And on that day of mindfulness, they practiced sitting mindfully, walking mindfully, eating mindfully, just slowing down, having discussion, getting together in community to share, to be nourished, to be heard, to really be there for each other. So stillness is not the opposite of action. In fact, stillness and action inter-are. They both support each other. And so you could say stillness is not inaction, it's non-action. It's not that we're not going to respond, it's that we're taking time for ourselves in order to become fresh again, to re-enter the fray, to take action again. So something else that I think is a key part of burnout is our motivation. And Mushim already spoke about the importance of intention. So if we work with an expectation that a certain outcome has to happen, then we're not able to be fully free in what we're doing. And that's very difficult. It's really a practice. I can't do it very well myself, but I see that the more I can just do what I feel needs to be done versus doing something with the hope or expectation of a certain outcome, the more energy I have and the more freed up my contribution can be. Because when we do something attached to an outcome, if it doesn't work, we lose all of our energy in the face of that supposed failure. Or if we think it's not going to work, we won't even try. And so we hold ourselves back. So there's an element of trust, of just getting clear, what is it that I really need to be doing, and doing it regardless of the outcome. And staying committed to just being there, offering. And we don't know the final outcome of what we're doing. You know? Often the immediate outcome doesn't give us much sense of success, but long term it could very well be exactly what is needed. So another example from the School of Youth for Social Service, the young people, there was a village in the south of Vietnam that was bombed by the US Army, and the social workers rebuilt the village, and that village was bombed again, and they rebuilt it again, and it was bombed again, and they rebuilt it a third time. And I think it happened a total of 4 times, and they didn't stop rebuilding the village. You would think, why? why keep doing that? But they weren't rebuilding the village for it to stay built. They were rebuilding the village because that's what they had to do, to affirm the dignity of themselves and of the villagers, and that they were working without this sense of expectation. Because it's so easy to fall into despair if we just focus on what the outcome is, especially if it's not what we were hoping for. So I remember also when I was a nun in Deer Park, our monastery in California, Thai came and visited us, and we were experiencing a lot of stress. We were just a small number of monks and nuns, and we had many visitors and big retreats and lots of work to do. And so one of the monastics asked Thai, how can we approach our work in a healthy way? And Thai said, don't work in order to get things done. If you work to try to finish what you have to do, the work will never be finished. You'll always have more work to do. So do what you can, and then you have to accept that that's your limit, and take a break and refresh yourself, take good care of yourself. And I've always remembered that work is never done. So if we have this attachment to getting everything done on our list, we may really hurt ourselves and our health. Another aspect I wanted to share about maintaining our freshness is a real turning towards our own experience and guarding our mind, being careful how we consume, what we take into our bodies and minds. And because if we focused too much on the external, we can drain our energy. Whereas if we bring our attention inwardly, we have a chance to replenish it. So many studies have shown that as far as happiness and well-being are concerned, really paying attention to and reducing how much time we spend on screens can have a huge impact on our sense of well-being. Spending time with other people, connecting with our communities, being outside in nature, taking care of our bodies with exercise, with good food, taking time for stillness, for rest, and not being on electronics, hours and hours and hours a day. Very important part of self-preservation is really caring for our bodies and where we put our attention and how much we take in terms of information. There's a beautiful quote in this book, Trauma Stewardship, of a Qigong master who says, when we put too much of our attention externally, we lose track. We actually weaken ourselves internally, and that we need to spend time to really care for this inner spark of light, this qi that's in each of us. We have to turn inwards to care for that. If we put too much energy in getting information outside, that inner spiritual strength will be weakened. So, and just one last thing I'll share about this emphasis on community is we can endure, we can be so much more resilient when we have strong relationships with people in our lives. The latest Time magazine on happiness, it's a whole issue on happiness, gave an example of people under great stress and how and pain, physical pain, and how their experience of pain was half as much when they held someone's hand close to them than if they had to endure it alone. So just to remind us all that really strengthening our bonds with community, with friends, with family, with those we love and care about is a very important way to take good care of ourselves and nourish ourselves and keep our freshness alive. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that wonderful teaching, Parajul. And now I would like to give it over to Mushim.
Thanks to you both and to everyone who's joined us here and will be joining us by looking at the recording. Once again, the invitation is for mindful resistance, how to not burn out. And for myself, when we say mindful resistance, we might say resistance to what? I'm with the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, California, and in all of our teachings, we're diversity and social justice centered. And we name that we are mindfully resisting oppression. So a little flash backwards to the spring, I think, of 1991. I was living at Green Gulch Zen Center, Green Gulch Farm Zen Center, which is an arm of San Francisco Zen Center in Marin County, adjacent to Muir Beach in California. It's one of the most beautiful places on the face of the earth. It's a Zen temple, and the practice has monastic aspects. And I was on staff, I was in residence there, and I remember coming out of the back of the mobile home or trailer in which I lived with my 1-year-old, maybe what he was 1.5-year-old son by then. It was a beautiful spring day. And I looked around and the sun was shining. It was a place called Spring Valley, and there were wildflowers all over the hills. The sky was blue, the air was fresh, the birds were singing, and I was totally exhausted. I was penniless, I was breastfeeding, my child was extremely active, and I was burnt out. I was completely burnt out. And I remember looking up at the hills and taking a moment to myself on my way to work, to my office, the office where I worked, and thinking, you know what? This place would be seen as remarkably beautiful by most people if they were in reasonably good health. But I can vaguely recognize that, but I can't feel it. I can't feel that this is beautiful, refreshing, or anything, because I'm on the verge of collapse. And if I collapse, maybe social services will come and take my child away from me. So it doesn't matter whether I'm burnt out or not, I need to go on. And I name this because there are many folks who are single parents, who are in situations where you may be working 2-3 jobs. And you may laugh if you think, well, how could I do self-care? And it is true that sometimes there may be periods, I hope they're not forever, where we need to kind of power on through. I myself have taken the Bodhisattva vows and precepts, and I'm always mindful that in Shantideva's Guide to the Way of the Bodhisattva, very famous text, in one of the translations it says that the way of the Bodhisattva is that we consider our desire to help the many beings, all sentient beings, be free from suffering. And one of the verses says, until these many beings pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life. So may I also be the source of life. So if you are burnt out, please try to connect to the source of life in any way that's available to you, and understand that you yourself are the source of life for so many who depend on you, and we don't want to burn out the source of life. Stephen, could you please put up slide number 1? What you're seeing here is what I call the Great Vow for Mindful Activists. I offer it to all of my students in my year-long program, Practice in Transformative Action, which is secular mindfulness training for agents of change, which means all of you, you're all agents of societal transformation. And it says, aware of suffering and injustice, I, Mushim, am working to create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. I promise, for the benefit of all, to practice self-care, mindfulness, healing, and joy. I vow not to burn out. And when I give out the vow to not burn out, there's a signature line, there's a date line to sign it on. It's a little contract for ourselves. And I invite you to take the great vow to not burn out today. This is an invitation. It means that you can say yes, you can say maybe, you can say no. And if your answer is no, I think that's really interesting and really good to know that your answer is no, I don't want to take this vow. So it's interesting to investigate that with curiosity and to non-judgment, and with non-judgment. What are my reasons, without judging ourselves at all, that I will not take a vow to not burn out? And a lot of great things can be revealed in that investigation. So this vow has gone viral through an article by the same name, I Vow Not to Burn Out in Buddha Dharma, that was published last year. You can Google it online. And I've received messages from many people, including an entire family in Australia that included an 8-year-old child. And they said that they had read the vow and they decided they would take the vow as a family together every single week, including the 8-year-old child. I am a mother. My son is 28 years old now. I've worked a lot with kids, and we can help children a lot, I think, to try to give them vocabulary to express when they feel stressed. I feel stressed. I feel stressed today. And then they can learn how to help themselves. We can help them to figure out ways that they can practice stress reduction and mindfulness. I remember when my kid, who was actually my mindfulness guinea pig, he was still in a car seat. And one day we were rolling along, I was quiet, I was driving, and he just suddenly burst out and he said, I feel distracted. So even very, very young children are quite capable of practicing mindfulness and of learning how to name and label what the inner mind-body states are that are arising, and then to address them and to relax and practice self-care. In my opinion, we want to resist. We want to resist racism. We want to resist heterosexism, Islamophobia, transphobia, all of the other isms. And we need to do it to care for the many beings. A prime burnout factor is isolation. So for those of you, and who among us has not experienced feeling isolated, alone, frightened, and vulnerable, I'll just invite you to just take a moment again. We're going to practice our self-care, breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Thich Nhat Hanh has said that Maitreya Buddha, the future Buddha, will not be a person, a savior, leader person. That Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of the future, and the future is here, will be a community, a sangha, a community of mindful harmony. Stephen, if you would please put up slide 2. And slide 2 shows, I hope that if you can take a look at it, that you'll smile. So this was taken at the end of the summer 2016 Vallecitos People of Color week-long silent meditation retreat in the wilderness outside of Taos, New Mexico. For those of you who are people of color, I invite you to look at, it's not up yet, but it will be, Vallecitos, VALLECITOS.org, Vallecitos Mountain Retreat Center, and I will be returning, part of a group of dynamite teachers of color, a teaching team, in the summer of 2018 for another People of Color week-long retreat. So this is for self-identified people of color. I've taught it for many years. It's always a beautiful time for people of color to gather together, not for networking, not for political action, not to talk about things, but instead to practice mindfulness meditation in walking, in movement, in just sitting around and looking at the incredibly beautiful landscape at 9,000 feet in the mountains, to see the stars at night, and to feel our connection, our human connection to one another that Kaira Jewel had mentioned in her Dharma talk. It's sometimes true that even if we have spiritual communities and communities for various reasons, we might feel that we're isolated there. So we might wish to seek out retreats, online communities through Facebook, with people who understand our struggles, whom we feel self-identify in ways that are similar to ourselves, be joyful together, share resources together, and thus to heal ourselves from internalized oppression. We need to heal from internalized oppression in order to mindfully resist. We have oppression from the outside. We also have internalized oppressions. And I'd like to share with you that one of my Dharma friends and students has put up a wonderful website now for immigrant communities and undocumented communities, which is called Undocu Healing. And it has wonderful healing resources and indigenous-based healing resources on that website. It's called Undocu Healing. So our second strategy is community and healing internalized oppression. The third and last strategy of mindful resistance and not burning out that I'd like to invite you and offer to you today is, of course, and we've already looked at this, embodied practice. Stephen, if you would please put up the third and last slide. And this points towards, Kaira Jewel mentioned Trauma Stewardship. It's a wonderful book that was gifted to me by one of my students. I would highly recommend those of you who'd like to look at it, And so we're now looking at what's called trauma-informed or healing-informed mindfulness with a lot of more understanding of how trauma works in the body and in the mind so that we can move towards healing that trauma. Becoming whole persons, again, in the present. So what you're looking at is a fun photo that was taken this past summer, the summer of 2017, at the Mangalam Buddhist Center in Berkeley, California. And it was at a small think tank conference of some of the leading socially engaged Buddhist thinkers, activists, teachers, bringing them together to talk about making refuge. That we might think about mindfulness. What does mindfulness really mean when it's an action to help ease the suffering in the world? And what the organizers came up with is that we can make refuge for others. Remember Shanti Deva, may I become the source of life for all the living creatures. And what I invited folks to do in my presentation was to do an exercise that's called Making a Storm. It is a trauma healing exercise. I saw it first in Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's one of the leading experts on trauma, on an online seminar he did. And it was done by two therapists who were working with children who had been orphaned after Hurricane Katrina. So the invitation is for everyone to get down in a circle, so you're all equal, get down on your tummies and look at one another. And then the leader begins to make a storm by tapping with your fingers gently the first few drops of rain. Then the rain starts falling faster and you begin to drum more rhythmically until the thunder and the lightning and the pelting rain is at maximum. And then we begin to decrease until the last little drop of rain stops and the sun comes out again. So I invite you to try this with people of any age, maybe children especially, and to just feel in your body how it feels to be with a group of people knowing we can get through the storms of life together. So thank you very, very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much for that, Mushim. That was quite lovely. And at this point, I want to move on to the next section where we'll have a brief conversation between our two Dharma teachers, and Mushim and Kaira will each ask each other one question. And maybe we'll start with Kaira. We'll start with you.
So thank you so much, Mushim. I really enjoyed the different points you made, and especially I was wanting to ask you about that moment where you realized you had to take care of yourself when your son was 1.5 years. And I wanted to ask you, what did you do at that point of realization? What steps did you take to begin to shift when you were really right at your lowest? If you would share a little more about that.
Sure. I'm just getting in my little time machine, Kaira, and going back to that moment. I can truly say it was a moment that I was so depleted, I couldn't even experience despair. And I was sort of vaguely freaked out, but I didn't even have the wattage to be terrified. That's how far gone I was. And what I can say at that moment was that I am Buddhist. I have taken, as I said, the Bodhisattva vows. And so for myself, what happened at that moment wasn't particularly anything that I could point to and say, oh, I decided I'm going to do more self-care. Maybe I can have a cup of tea for a while. Maybe I can try to get more babysitting. Just my brain couldn't even do that. All I knew was, just answering very honestly, was I have brought this child into the world. I love this child, and I want to have, for this child to have a good life. I don't know how that's going to happen. However, I know that because of this love and because of this commitment to raising this human being in our society, I am going to find a way where there is no way. And when I solidified that intention for myself, then I was able to tap into, I would say, the transpersonal realm. into the, I don't know, primal or the cosmic energy of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, just that realm of energy which I believe is available to us, that is larger than us, and which various people can access through prayer, through meditation, through calling out for help to the universe, and to be open to receiving the abundant energy that is there. It's a very individual experience, obviously, and it's an experience that many people have had in the spiritual realm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mushim, did you have a question to pose to Kaira Jewel?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Kaira Jewel, you were a monastic, a nun for a long time. In fact, I met you once, was at Lynn Fine's house here in Berkeley, when you were with one of the local Thich Nhat Hanh sanghas or groups, practice groups. So I'd like to just ask you, if this question resonates in any way, what would you say if you were asked, when we think of the term mindful resistance, resistance in this sense is, I think, being used in the political sense. What does mindful resistance look like and mean to Buddhist monastics? Is it the same or different for monastics than it is for laypersons or householders, especially activists who are on the front lines in terms of direct action, protests, demonstrations, and the like?
Well, I think that question is really interesting because I think it points to maybe two streams within the monastic community. There's a stream of more contemplation, and there's a stream of more activism, engagement in the world. And in many Catholic traditions, those are really clear. Like there are contemplative orders in the Catholic tradition, and then orders that are more, in the world, hospitals, schools, services. And I think in Buddhist monastic communities, I think those are two streams that have to be harmonized. And as far as the meaning of mindful resistance, I would say from my experience in the monastic community, the real object of resistance was the poisons in the mind, or the discrimination, violence, hatred, all the things that motivate us to create suffering in the world. So not a particular group or a particular section of the society, but what was at the root of those, people creating suffering for others. So and I think also one big area that, as I understand, the monastic view on mindful resistance was really to resist being pulled into a pattern of overdoing, resisting the pressure to lose ourselves in a cause. So really maintaining a sense of groundedness in practice, so that there was some energy with which to engage always. And I remember once I heard there was a dialogue between a monastic and Thai, and this monastic was saying to Tai that they've wanted to be more engaged and work with homeless people and do more things out in the world. And Tai said to this monk that our role as monastics was to provide a place for people who do that kind of work to come and take care of themselves. That wasn't necessarily our role as monastics to actually be doing that, because then there wouldn't be spaces like retreat places, or, well, there's lots of retreat places run by lay people, so there are many other places besides monasteries. But that was Tai's response to what the focus, his understanding of the focus of the monastic community was to be very engaged in the world, but in a particular way where practice was central, so that there could be places of refuge for those who were, more on the front lines to come back to. And I think he used the image of the hand, that there are, and I would say it's not just monastics, but there are lots of people who may be drawn to a more contemplative way of resisting. And maybe that's like the palm of the hand. And then there are people who are drawn to more external ways of resisting, and they're like the fingers, and they inter-are. There's not one right way or wrong way, but they depend on each other. So those who are more contemplative really need the insights from those who are more on the front lines, and need the inspiration of what they're doing to give the role, to give the life of a contemplative more meaning and structure and purpose. And those who are more active, engaged, also need those who are in a more contemplative place to come back to and to be supported by, so they can go back out. So I thought that was a very inclusive way of understanding those two streams, whether they're in monastic communities or whether they're in lay communities in our Buddhist sanghas. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Mushim and Kaira Jewel. So there's been a lot of great insight and teaching and Dharma shared. I just want to invite us to just take a couple of moments of silent reflection, and just to take it in. And also invite folks at this time also to place your questions into the Q&A during these couple of minutes.
So, shall we begin to answer some questions? There's so many. I'm thinking we might.
Absolutely. These are wonderful questions, and I'm going to start off first with a question from Christy, and she writes, "There's an equation: suffering equals pain plus resistance. I've been struggling with how to resist the isms and phobias without creating more suffering for myself." Well, Kaira Jewel, can you speak to this equation, suffering equals pain plus resistance, and how mindful resistance does not lead to further suffering?
Thank you for the wonderful question. I think a big part of being able to change things is accepting them. So resistance is sort of maybe a bit confusing used in this way, but I think really in order to shift things, they have to be fully seen and accepted as they are. If we haven't really opened to the pain of the reality that we're facing, then our action will be very much a reaction, and it won't have the kind of wisdom and depth of insight in it that we need in order to really act skillfully. So I'll just tell a story about this. Many people were asking Ty what to do with all the despair around this real possibility that the human race is going to destroy itself ecologically, environmentally. And he would tell this story of this nun that came from Vietnam to Plum Village because she had a terminal diagnosis of cancer. She was given 3 months to live, and she wanted to spend that time in Plum Village, and she practiced with all of her heart. She had accepted she was going to die, and she said, the last 3 months, I want them to be a very committed time of practice. And so she practiced very continuously, morning to evening. And 3 months later, her cancer was in remission, and she went on to live another 15 or 20 years. And Tai used that story as a metaphor for the human race, saying, we're at this very critical time in our history of humanity, where if we can grasp that, yes, we are really on the verge of total catastrophe. If we can look that in the face and accept that that's really where we are, then what we do now from that place of clarity will have the capacity for complete transformation. But it comes from accepting first the reality. So when you speak about fighting these different isms and bringing a real shift in consciousness, how can we really be with that, the pain of that, and yes, in a way, take the resistance to the pain out of that equation, so that you just have pain. You have pain plus acceptance equals wisdom, and knowing what to do next. So I think, resistance used in the context of this webinar is helpful, and there's other ways to speak about it as well. So engagement, real willingness to say, yes, this is really what's going on, and I can still make a difference. What I do matters. And seeing ourselves as part of the whole versus in us, them dichotomies and dualisms. So all those isms and all those people who have, we all have different isms, right? Can we see that we are all on this path together, and that accepting that this is where we are, but standing up to say no, it doesn't mean that we don't say no. The acceptance doesn't mean that we don't engage, but we have to, but it's very effective if we can acknowledge that the roots of these isms come from ignorance, and no person is our enemy. Just ways of seeing, ways of perceiving are the things we want to uproot, but getting rid of a person isn't going to end the root of the ignorance. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. And just briefly, there were a couple of questions about the name of the book that Mushim had mentioned, that the title of that book is Trauma Stewardship. And I'm going to address the next question from Reed to Mushim. And Reed asks, how might we work differently to prevent burnout versus recovering from it? He says, at last, I took the vow, but I find myself in the latter category.
So the question, as I'm hearing it, is how can we be proactive to prevent burnout? Instead of thinking, well, if I burn out, here are my resources to recover from it. So there's a lot of wisdom there. I want to appreciate that. And before I do that, I'll mention there was another, I had mentioned Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a really wonderful expert on trauma. And a book I didn't mention that I really recommend is called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. It was a New York Times bestseller. It's a fabulous read. It's very accessible, full of great information and an emphasis on mindfulness. So here would be my response to how we can be proactive about not burning out. First of all, we do need to set an intention. Let's be conscious about this and say, okay, my life is very pressured. Maybe things will cascade and I will burn out. However, I'm committed. I have an intention to not burn out. Let's set that intention, take the vow, and why, and know why we want to take the vow. In the way that I've languaged it, it's because we're aware of suffering and injustice in the world, and I'm promising for the benefit of all, because I'm trying to help be an agent of change, positive transformation. So for that reasons, and then the proactive things are embedded in the vow. I promise for the benefit of all to practice self-care, mindfulness, healing, and joy. And for each of us, we could sit down and just take a little worksheet. It would really be better to do this with one or even better, two friends, and to give each other, converse with each other what our answers are for all of those categories. And to say, what do I do for self-care? What are my mindfulness practices? What are my healing practices and resources? And what do I do, very importantly, to be more joyful? I'm lucky because I tend to be a person who is naturally, if I'm feeling well enough, I'm naturally pretty joyful. I see a lot of things that I smile and I laugh about. I take time out to have joy. I cultivate joy. And for those of you whom it may not come so naturally for, there's definitely things that you can do to cultivate joy, and a lot of resource for that. So please do that in community also. You can do that online. You can do that on the phone. I myself am not sort of anti-screen, and I'm not anti-technology, in the sense that there's so much magnificent and resistant and mindful and wonderful, loving community being built through social media, through wikis, through ways that people can, if they feel isolated, and I'm seeing in the Q&A feed that's coming up that there's a persistent theme I'm seeing from a number of people. I feel alone. I feel isolated. Well, yes, that does happen. So if you have access to the internet, I urge you, reach out, form a Facebook group, invite people in, do it safely, of course, do it mindfully, reach out to people. I've sent emails to authors of articles that I've read and just appreciated it. I'm a writer and I know how much work goes into it. Thank you so much for writing that article that was published in the Buddhist Journal of Ethics. And almost always I get an answer back and I become friends with the author, and that can lead to doing projects together. There are many ways to come out of this, this isolation that we can find ourselves in, and that, I would say, is the primary proactive way to prevent burnout, is to connect to ourselves, connect to others, connect to our purpose, connect to our value, and through everything, connect to your joy.
That's wonderful, Mushim. Thank you. This next question I will address to Kaira Jewel. David asks, do you encourage revisiting areas of personal trauma, if done skillfully, to help keep us stay fresh?
Thank you for the question. You know, I think that it is our personal trauma that brings us into, it's that in us that attracts us to healing work, whether it's spiritual work, spiritual practice, or activism work in transforming the pain in the world. I really feel like it's like a magnet, what is unhealed in us, that's drawing us to situations where we can both be healed and also be part of healing. And I think the question is how to do it skillfully. There was a beautiful pamphlet made by the Mushim, you might, the movement for the social change movement. It's a Berkeley organization, Movement Strategy Center in Berkeley. They put a booklet together called Coming Out of the Spiritual Closet for activists who were finding that their activism was much resourced by doing their own personal healing work. And some of the activists in this pamphlet spoke about how unresolved personal trauma was actually interfering with their work of healing in their communities. And that many of the ills in society that they were trying to address were getting repeated in their own activist organizations because of unhealed personal trauma. Competition, judgment of others, being very critical versus working together, shutting down our emotions and trying to just do the task. That wasn't working, and I teach with a wonderful activist in England. Her name is Sophie Banks. She was part of setting up the Transition Town in Totnes, Transition Town Network that's spread all over the world now to make communities fossil fuel free. And she said that in any healthy group, 25% of the time needs to be spent on group process, on how we actually work together as a group, so that these hidden things in our subconscious don't derail our work together. And that has to do with healing personal trauma, because we all have, our shadow. And so understanding how that works in group is, a quarter of our work of social change. So I think just knowing that that's part of the path of an activist, of a spiritual practitioner, is to be attentive to those, those parts of ourselves that arise, and ask to be healed. And I feel like it's something that is self-directed. Mushim was using the term self-identified for POC, and we use that term for many different categories of identity. I feel like our trauma is self-identified. Like our trauma will show itself when it's ready. We don't need to go digging or trying to figure out. Like I really feel like there's an organic process where at this point in our life, this part of our shadow or wounds come up, because that's the time when we want, when they're ready or the conditions are ripe for them to be addressed. So I think part of it's discerning and creating enough space in our daily life so that those things can arise and be held in a way that's appropriate for that moment in time. So I guess my sense is that these things just make themselves known. And so that's the moment to be with them and take care of them as part of our work in the world. To me, they're completely intertwined, and that is very much important part of staying, holding and nourishing our freshness.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. I'm going to address this question next. This next question to Mushim, coming from Louise from Oakland. Good afternoon, Louise. What are ways to share these self-care approaches with our sanghas, especially with mostly white sanghas, where people seem less motivated to blend activist resistance with contemplative practice?
Thank you, fellow Oaklander. I'm in Oakland, California. And also shout out to my folks in my home temple, where I started out in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I see that you're in the feed as well, and to everyone, of course. So the question that I'm hearing is, how can we share these practices of these transformative and mindful practices that are not exclusive? They're not about shutting ourselves off from oppression and social and collective pain. They're about how we bring them in, we transform them in ourselves, and we also then become agents of change with predominantly white convert spiritual Buddhist communities. So I would invite you to look at a website which is put together by some of our Dharma friends in the Insight community of Washington, D.C. And I believe it's called whiteawake.org. I'm not sure of that, but it's, I think the group is called White Awake. It's got wonderful resources on it. I urge you to go and take a look at it. And to just say in a nutshell, in the situation that you're talking about, from my point of view as a diversity and inclusion consultant, what the Sangha needs to be invited into is a very deep, and it will not be untroubled path of practice, of investigation, and it will be so worthwhile and so enriching and so wonderful also, of beginning to understand what unearned white privilege is. There are many resources on that. And how in this country, speaking for the United States, I am a United Statesian, there is a huge gap often between the world and the perception of reality, normal reality, that many white people have on one hand, and then the world and perception of reality that many people of color have. This is speaking in huge generalities, so one can argue with it, and at the same time, I'm asking you to just take a mindful moment and consider that if this is true and these worlds are so separate, how can we begin to bring them closer together in what Dr. Martin Luther King called beloved community, and what my Sangha East Bay Meditation Center calls radical inclusivity. And the first step is generally to become more knowledgeable about and more aware of, more comfortable with working with unearned white privilege.
Yes, thank you, Mushim. Our next question is from Annie. Hello, Annie. I'm going to address it to, it is addressed specifically to Kaira Jewel. Annie writes, I am curious about how Thai's approach to social engagement evolved from the time of the School of Youth for Social Service to the time of developing monasteries that invited lay people to come to them.
Thanks for that question, Annie, and hello to everyone at Morning Sun in New Hampshire. So Thai's focus during the Vietnam War was very much on ending the war. And in that time, in his wonderful autobiographical book, A Fragrant Palm Leaves, he speaks about setting up a center in the highlands of Vietnam for a small group of people. So already then, it wasn't technically a monastery, but it was really a practice center. And it was sort of the first prototype of what he was going to set up in many other places around the world after that. But there was really a sense of the need for a place to come back and really deepen the practice. So people studied there, they wrote, they reflected on the history of Buddhism in Vietnam, trying to glean insights that hadn't been fully ripened maybe from the teachers who taught them. They felt like there were things that still could be brought out, like the Zen tradition in Vietnam. So there was already that combination of School of Youth for Social Service and this practice center that was the place for people to come back to and really be still, be self-reflective. And then when Thai was exiled for calling for peace and came to the West, his first actions were to create Sangha. You know, he talked about being a cell expunged from the body, and that, you know, a cell on its own is not going to survive. And so he knew very quickly he needed to create another body that he could be a part of. And so the earliest versions of that was Sweet Potato Farm in France, in rural France, and then that was followed by Plum Village. And the first intention of those places were to create a space for Vietnamese refugees to take refuge and to be able to cultivate their own cultural traditions. So it wasn't a monastery in the beginning. Thai was the only monk, and it was maybe 10 years before Thai had been in the West, before Thai began to ordain people to become monastics. So lay people were the first people who were part of these centers that Thai started in France. And also very much socially engaged, right? Providing a place where people could learn the language of the country they were going to be residing in after leaving Vietnam. Thai was sometimes taking care of people's kids. You know, in his book, his story of taking care of this little girl Thuy for some years while her parents were working in Paris or trying to come over from Vietnam. So there was a real sense of trying to address the needs of the people that he was connected with. And only, I think, after some time did the focus become on creating a practice center in France and ordaining monastics. And from what I understand, at the beginning, Thai was resistant to ordaining monastics. He wanted I think he didn't feel like that was a good vehicle at the very beginning of his time in the West to really push the practice and to bring practice into society. And so it was maybe a decade before he started to ordain people. And then there was a shift. So now there's creating a monastic community. So the emphasis was on creating, retreats and places of practice for then lay people to come and join in a fourfold community. And I think the emphasis was always on staying socially engaged. But when he had this growing monastic community, which is some now 1,000 monastics strong in 5 different continents, there was a different focus on how to sustain that. And so while, there were retreats for business people, retreats for police officers, retreats for people of color, going to South Korea, to the border with North Korea, bringing Palestinians and Israelis to Plum Village for healing and reconciliation work, sending monastics to Liberia, this war-torn country after Civil War, to bring mindfulness to child soldiers, ex-child soldiers, many, many ways to keep staying in touch with the suffering in the world, and keeping this also other focus on keeping a monastic community going financially as well as spiritually, as well as relevant in the world, and always this place where many, many lay people could take refuge, where thousands of people come to Plum Village for the summer retreat and many of the other practice centers. So I would say that it got more complex over time. Thai was doing many more things. And so hope that is sort of an answer for your question.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. I just want to do a quick time check. I know we're at 12:40, and we still have a lot of questions now. And just to respect everyone's time, I think we have enough time for just a few more questions, and then we'll have to close. Our next question I'm going to address to Mushim, and it is from Wendy in Ontario. She asks, often I miss the signs that I'm on the way to burnout until I am near the falling off cliff. What suggestions do you have to help with noticing the early signs of burnout?
Thank you. Shout out to all of our Dharma friends in Canada. It's a really excellent question, and I'm sorry to say, all roads lead back to mindfulness. Therefore, we can have an intention. I think one of the best mindfulness practices that we can do, that is the most helpful, it's very accessible for many people. It doesn't need to be in a Buddhist context at all. It's called the body scan. And you can Google it. You can find good audio recordings of guided body scan meditations. If you find one you don't like, keep looking until you find another. And For the body scan, we can do it at length. We can also do it kind of in a lightning way. So say I'm walking down the street in Oakland and I'm mindful of what's going on, so I'm safe. And as I'm walking along, maybe I decide to do just a really quick body scan. So I'm asking myself, what physical sensations am I noticing? Where are spots of tension in my body? Could I do a little bit of stretching, maybe walk in a different way? Could I pause a moment? What can I do to help myself to bring myself back into a place of more ease, of more refreshment, of more balance, maybe even just a little bit, maybe even a lot, to become, as Kaira Jewel was saying, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, let me check in on my flowerness. Am I fresh or am I wilted? Or am I really kind of dried up and on the verge of total non-freshness? So we do that mindfulness check in that this body scan. We can also scan our emotions. Again, with non-judgment, just asking myself, what's my emotional state right now? What's my mental state? And then mindfulness itself, that's our inner wisdom. Mindfulness will arise when we pause to ask those questions, and we'll say things like, wow, I feel really irritable. Or maybe at work and someone asks a completely reasonable question. When do you think you can get that report in? And inside ourselves, we feel all of these irritable voices shouting, just back off. Why are you asking me that? I don't have time to get to that. I'm not even sure when I can get to that. So on and so forth. Or I'm a parent, so we can notice there's burnout if instead of responding to our child lovingly, compassionately, maybe humorously and appropriately, there's part of ourselves that feels so pressured, as though, can you just back off? I need something for myself. Mommy needs something for herself. As a parent, I don't have any room to breathe at all. I love you, and I wish that you would just go off to yourself for a while and not bug me. So irritability, feeling crowded, pressured inside, feeling depleted, feeling, someone on the feed mentioned feeling numb. So that's when we notice that we're not feeling much of anything. We don't have a lot of emotions, and that we feel disconnected and estranged from the forces of life that we see around us and that we know are within us. That could be a state of clinical depression. And so when we're able to do these little scans, do the body scan and also do the scan of the mind, the emotions, the heart, regularly in little flashes or longer throughout the day, keep in touch with yourself, and you will be able to see those signs of burnout approaching from farther and farther away, and sometimes till you get to the point where they're even on the distant horizon, and then you will have plenty of time to be able to schedule a yoga class, to be able to figure out what you need to do to feel more supported, make a dinner date with a friend, take some time out with your kid to just be completely silly and wave your arms and hands around and put on some music and dance around. You will be able to find ways to help yourself and to increase your self-care and your sustainability.
Thank you, Mushim. I want to address the next question to Kaira Jewel, and it's actually following up on the audience member you had mentioned about numbness. So Joyce asks, what do you do when isolation is so deep and overwhelming due to where one lives? That sometimes it makes feeling things impossible, and you feel numb. So the question is how to address a very profound isolation and numbness.
Thank you for that question, Joyce. I think it's takes a lot of courage to ask and put that out there. I think the experience of numbness, uh, it it wants something. It's there, but it also has a need. And I think trying to get close to what that experience is and honoring it, being mindful of the numbness, um, being mindful of the feeling of isolation. And, you know, um, if there is um, an inner pull, an inner experience that you have the strength, you have um, the resources to reach out and make connections, either virtually, as Mushim was saying, online can be very nurturing for Sangha and community if geographically it's too difficult. But just to maybe sit with that feeling of numbness, of isolation, and like I was saying earlier about acceptance, can you really be with it? Can you really honor that that's what's there? And as difficult as it might be to experience it, as difficult as it might be to even access it, because numbness is hard to feel. But if we can turn towards it and take time to feel it and just see what does it want from you, what would it like you to do in response, um, and rather than trying to push it away and fix it, immediately, perhaps really being with it and writing about it, drawing about it, going outside to see if nature can help to. There's lots of ways to heal isolation. It's not only with other people, although that's a very important place of healing. But I've had very profound experiences of belonging with trees or with water or with land, just earth. So there are many ways that we're interconnected with other beings, and nature and being in your body are ways to access that. But if it's not that accessible for you to have this inner motivation to be with the feelings and to perhaps bring you towards other people or other beings, if it's something like depression, which can show up as numbness and can be a result of isolation, I think there's certain thresholds at which we don't want to try to do things by ourselves. We might just be it might just be too difficult, in which case I think it's very healthy to get support, to either a therapist or a doctor, or there are places. If I'm not sure what your experience of this extreme isolation and numbness is, if it's like really something quite intense that needs more care than you can provide for yourself on your own, I would very much encourage you to explore that, and just to try to assess how much can I really hold this, because one of the teachings is also about is our mindfulness strong enough to embrace what's arising. And we need to know that. And if it's not strong enough, then that's when we go to other people and we ask them to help us with their mindfulness to hold what we can't hold on our own. And that may be a sangha, it may be, a medical professional or a psychotherapist or someone. So we need to really discern what's within our reach to hold, and what do we really need help to hold. And I just want to echo what Mushim was saying earlier about really looking at what are things we can do each day to nourish our joy and to nourish our sense of connectedness, and to make a list and put it up somewhere you see it every day, and make sure you do one of those things on that list every single day. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Kaira Jewel. That was wonderful. Unfortunately, we have, thank you for all the questions. That we are over time, and we just have time just for one more question, and which I'm going to address to Mushim, and it's from Amanda, who asks a very pertinent question: how can we survive depression without internalizing it?
Thank you very much, Amanda. That is a profound question. And what I'm hearing the question is, how can we survive oppression without internalizing it? Here is my answer, is first of all, it might not be possible. We might, despite our best efforts, end up internalizing some of the oppression. And I think there's a spectrum. There's can be a greater amount of internalization, and then there can be a lesser amount. So we can just kind of aim for the lesser amount, or for none at all. That can be our goal. And if there's some, forgive ourselves. It is the nature of oppression. It's a nature of oppression to get inside our heads and our psyches and convince us that the messages we are receiving from the dominant culture are true. And that operates in all the different parts of the brain. So whereas our thinking adult rational minds may say, well, that is ridiculous, that's untrue, that's completely untrue, there are going to be parts of ourselves and our emotional parts of ourselves that, of course, are being affected by messages that we are less than, that we are ugly, that we are stupid, that we do not deserve to have equal rights, that we do not deserve to live lives of joy, and for our children and our elders also to be able to be comfortable and to live in a state of abundance. So we can understand that that is the nature of it. And the more we name it, the more we're able to recognize, as Kaira Jewel was saying, we need to see clearly. And for that, we need to read. We need to reach out to other people. We need to have discussions that are nourishing, not depressing, not depleting, not that make us burn out in anger, that are thoughtful, that are compassionate, and that are very, very honest and clear, in which we say, look, that is an oppressive dynamic. That's a pattern of oppression that is replicating itself, maybe just despite our best efforts in our own sangha, in our own nonprofit, in our own social justice oriented organization, to be able to clearly see that. And the more we name it, the less we're going to internalize it, because we are going to understand that is not me, that is not mine, that is something that affects me, and it's also not me, it's also not mine, and I can find ways to be able to not internalize that oppression. I can find poems, I can find gatherings, I can find indigenous forms of body wisdom and movement and healing. Whatever it is that I'm experiencing, I can find ways to bring myself back into a state of joyful self-affirmation, of wholeness, and of enthusiasm, of freshness, of joy, to be able to just stand up and say, here I am, world. This is me. Accept me as I am, with all of my parts, because I deserve to be here, as does everyone.
Thank you, Mushim. And so unfortunately, we have to end the Q&A portion of today. And I just want to bring it over to Kaira Jewel for one more message.
And so before I share a little bit more about Dana, I just wanted to invite Mushim, if you wanted to put your website on the chat, and I'll do the same for mine, so people can continue to stay in touch with us if they would like. And I also just wanted to say that I'll be offering a retreat for activists in the Baltimore area, November 3rd to the 5th. And maybe Stephen can send that out to the list if people are interested in learning more about that. If also Mushim has things related to our audience that you'd like to let people know about. So if you appreciate this webinar, I hope you will support it. Your Dana enables Mushim and I and Parallax to keep offering this kind of resource. And you saw where Stephen said where you could make a donation for this webinar. So we really hope you'll support this, and so that it can continue to happen. And we're so very glad we had this chance to be with each of you from all over this beautiful planet. Thank you for showing up. It's very heartwarming to know we're sitting with so many of you from so many places. And may your practice continue beautifully in interrupting the oppression that is around us and inside of us, as you take good care of yourselves and deepen in this vow not to burn out. And just know that we are all practicing together with you. We're together in this. So thank you for being on this path. And thank you so much, Mushim and Stephen. Thank you.